My sister called me dead weight in front of everyone. I let her speak, then opened Dad's letter. The champagne glasses clinked around Rebecca's elaborately decorated dining room as my sister stood to make her toast. I should have known something was wrong by the way her eyes gleamed when they locked with mine. At 58, I thought I'd grown immune to my younger sister's jabs, but nothing could have prepared me for what came next. "Let's raise a glass to family," Rebecca announced, her voice carrying across the room filled with relatives, friends, and even a few business associates she'd invited to her 60th birthday celebration. Her pearls caught the light of the chandelier as she gestured toward me. Even Margaret found time to join us tonight. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, the only one placed at the far end of the table, almost as an afterthought. "You know," Rebecca continued, swirling her champagne, "people often ask me about my older sister. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching. What does Margaret do?" they say, and I never quite know how to answer. My chest tightened. I took a small sip of water, ignoring the sympathetic glance from Cousin Ellen across the table. Because while the rest of us have moved forward, built careers, families, lives worth mentioning, Margaret has always been content to. She paused dramatically. Exist. The family's dead weight. The room fell silent. I felt the blood drain from my face as 40 pairs of eyes turned toward me, a mixture of shock, pity, and, from some, poorly disguised amusement. "But we love her anyway," Rebecca added with a theatrical sigh. "That's what family does, right? We carry our burdens together." She raised her glass higher. "To family, all of us, even the ones who contribute nothing." The toast that followed was awkward, half-hearted. I sat frozen, my hands trembling beneath the tablecloth as conversations gradually resumed around me. No one met my eyes. No one challenged Rebecca's words. The roast beef on my plate might as well have been cardboard. My mind raced through decades of similar moments. Rebecca belittling my job as a librarian, mocking my small apartment, commenting on my single status at family gatherings. But she'd never been this bold, this cruel with an audience. "Don't look so upset, Maggie," Rebecca whispered as she passed behind my chair later. "You know I'm just being honest. Someone has to be." I excused myself after dinner, retreating to the powder room where I splashed cold water on my face. The woman in the mirror looked back at me, gray streaking through brown hair, lines around eyes that had seen too much disappointment. When had I started looking so defeated? "You should leave," I whispered to my reflection. "Just go." But something kept me rooted. Pride, perhaps. I wouldn't give Rebecca the satisfaction of driving me away in tears. Not tonight. Not again. As I reached into my purse for lipstick, my fingers brushed against an envelope I'd carried for months but never had. The courage to open the last letter my father wrote before passing away 6 months ago. His attorney had handed it to me after the will reading, saying Dad had instructed it was for my eyes only. "Not now," I murmured, pushing it aside. But a strange impulse took hold. If not now, when? What was I waiting for? With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper covered in my father's familiar, shaky handwriting. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, I've already gone. There are things I should have told you in life but never found the courage. I hope you'll forgive an old man's cowardice. First, know that I've always been immensely proud of you, not in spite of your quiet life, but because of it. Your kindness to me and your mother during our final years meant everything, even when we didn't show it properly. Second, I need to warn you about Rebecca. I've known for years that she's been manipulating the family against you. The stories she told about you borrowing money, the rumors about why you never married John, all fabrications designed to elevate herself by diminishing you. Most importantly, you should know that Rebecca has been planning to sell the family home without informing you of your rightful share. As my will states, the house belongs equally to both of you, despite what she may have told others. In the safe deposit box at First National, key enclosed, you'll find documents proving that Rebecca borrowed against my medical care fund in my final year, money that disappeared. I've left evidence of everything there, including her attempts to have me change my will to exclude you entirely. I was too weak to stand up to her then. Please forgive me for that. But you, Margaret, have always been stronger than you knew. Remember what I told you when you were little? Still waters run deep. You've always been the deep water, my girl, Not flashy like the rapids, but profound, sustaining. Never let anyone make you feel less for that. With all my love, Dad, I read the letter twice, my hands shaking so badly I had to set it down on the marble countertop. The world around me seemed to shift and realign. All these years, I'd thought Dad hadn't noticed, hadn't cared. A knock on the door jolted me back to the present. "Margaret? Are you all right in there?" It was Aunt Susan, the only one who had smiled genuinely when I arrived. "Just a minute," I called, my voice steadier than I expected. Carefully tucked the letter back into my purse, applied my lipstick, and straightened my shoulders. The woman in the mirror looked different now. Something had changed in her eyes. For 20 years, I'd accepted my role as the family's invisible member, the one easily dismissed, the dead weight. I'd believed their narrative about my life, internalized their judgment that my choices amounted to nothing. But my father had seen the truth, and now so did I. I opened the bathroom door and smiled at Aunt Susan. "I'm fine," I said. "Actually, I'm better than fine." I returned to the dining room where Rebecca was holding court, describing her upcoming Mediterranean cruise. She faltered slightly when she saw me, clearly surprised I hadn't fled. "Margaret," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "I was just telling everyone how worried I've been about you lately. Living alone all these years can't be healthy." 24 hours ago, I would have looked down, mumbled something noncommittal, and found the nearest exit. But the letter in my purse felt like a shield, my father's words armor against decades of calculated cruelty. I smiled, a real smile that reached my eyes. "Thank you for your concern, Rebecca," I said, my voice clear enough that conversations around us quieted. "But I'm doing just fine." She blinked, momentarily thrown by my calm response. "In fact," I continued, reaching for my coat, "I have some important business to attend to tomorrow. It's been a revealing evening." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" I simply shook my head. "Good night, Rebecca. Happy birthday. As Yuri." I walked toward the door. I could feel her staring after me, sensing something had changed but unable to identify what. For the first time in our adult lives, I was steps ahead of her, and it felt exhilarating. Outside in the cool evening air, I took a deep breath and looked up at the stars. Tomorrow, I would visit the bank and open that safe deposit box. Tomorrow would begin a new chapter. But tonight, I savored the simple, profound realization. I was never the dead weight. I had been carrying them all along. The bank lobby felt unnaturally quiet as I stood before the manager's desk the next morning. Sleep had eluded me. Dad's letter had unleashed a flood of memories, each one taking on new meaning in light of his revelations. "I'll need some identification, Ms. Wheeler," the manager said, his voice professionally neutral. I handed over my driver's license, wondering if he could see the change in me. Did I look different today? I certainly felt different, right this way. As we walked toward the vault, I thought about Rebecca's face when I'd walked out of her party. For 20 years, she'd cultivated an image of me as pathetic, underachieving, barely worth mentioning. The spinster librarian who missed out on life. Last night was supposed to cement that narrative once and for all. "Take as much time as you need," the manager said, unlocking the safe deposit box and sliding it onto a small table in a private room. "Press the button when you're finished." The metal box felt surprisingly heavy. With Dad's key, I unlocked it, hesitating before lifting the lid. Whatever was inside would change everything. I knew that with absolute certainty. The first document was a handwritten ledger in Dad's meticulous accounting style. Dates, amounts, and notes tracked money flowing from his accounts to Rebecca's. $5,000 here, $10,000 there. The most recent entries, dated during his final months, showed transfers totaling over $120,000 from what he labeled medical care fund. My mouth went dry. Dad and Mom had saved that money for decades, putting aside small amounts from every paycheck to ensure they wouldn't burden their children with healthcare costs in their final years. I'd watched Mom clip coupons, Dad repair the same old car, year after year, all to build that safety net. Beneath the ledger was a file of bank statements confirming each transaction, along with a letter from Dad's oncologist detailing treatments that had been canceled due to patients' financial constraints. Treatments that might have extended his life. Treatments that had apparently been sacrificed while Rebecca renovated her kitchen and took a 2-week trip to Bali, both documented in photos she'd proudly displayed on social media during Dad's Final months. My hands started shaking. I set the papers down and took several deep breaths, fighting back nausea. The next document was a copy of Dad's will. Not the amended version that had been read after his funeral, but an earlier draft. In it, the family home on Maple Street was left entirely to me, with a note explaining this was compensation for the years I'd spent caring for him and Mom while Rebecca was building her life elsewhere. Paper-clipped to it was a legal memo from Dad's attorney, dated 3 months before his death, detailing a meeting where Rebecca had arrived with Dad to make changes. The attorney noted Dad seemed confused and heavily medicated, but Rebecca had insisted he was having a good day and wanted to update his will. The revised will, the one that had been executed, left the house to both of us equally. I closed my eyes, remembering the day of the will reading. Rebecca's performative tears, her speech about how she'd have to look after poor Maggie's interests since I clearly couldn't manage money. The sympathetic nods from relatives who'd long ago accepted Rebecca's version of our family dynamic. The final item in the box was a sealed envelope with my name on it. Unlike the formal letter I'd opened at Rebecca's party, this one contained a birthday card, the kind with a watercolor landscape and sentimental verse. Dad had written inside, "Margaret, I meant to give you this on your last birthday but wasn't strong enough to attend. I'm setting this aside with my important papers so you'll find it someday. You asked me once, when you were about 12, why Rebecca always seemed to shine brighter than you in everyone's eyes. Do you remember what I told you? The moon doesn't need to shout to be seen. It just keeps its course and eventually outshines everything else. You've always been my moon, steady and true. I wish I'd been strong enough to stand up for you more often. I wish I'd told you how much I admired your quiet strength. All my love." Dad, a tear splashed onto the card before I realized I was crying. I quickly wiped it away, not wanting to smudge his words. The card was dated 14 months ago, my last birthday before he died. I sat in that sterile bank room for nearly an hour, organizing the documents and making notes. By the time I pressed the button for the manager, I had a clear picture of what had happened and what needed to happen next. Back in my apartment, I spread everything across my dining table and created a careful inventory. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca hadn't just manipulated our father during his vulnerable final months. She'd systematically diverted money meant for his care, while simultaneously positioning herself as the devoted daughter. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "You left so abruptly last night. Is everything okay with you? You seemed off." I could almost hear her voice, the fake concern masking vigilance. She was probing, trying to determine if something had changed. Had Dad mentioned anything to me? Did I know about the house? I set the phone aside without responding. For the first time in our adult relationship, I had the advantage of seeing the full chessboard, while she still thought we were playing checkers. That evening, my doorbell rang. I peered through the peephole to find Aunt Susan standing there, her round face pinched with worry. "I hope you don't mind me dropping by," she said when I opened the door. "I've been thinking about last night and, well, I wanted to check on you." I hesitated before inviting her in. Aunt Susan had always been kind to me, but she was also Rebecca's godmother and had a framed photo of my sister in her living room. "That toast Rebecca made," she said, settling onto my couch. "It was cruel, Margaret. Completely uncalled for." I studied her face, looking for signs of insincerity. "But you didn't say anything." Aunt Susan flinched. "No, I didn't. None of us did, and that's part of why I'm here." She wrung her hands in her lap. "We've all gotten used to Rebecca setting the tone where you're concerned. I'm ashamed of that." Her words hung in the air between us. I thought about the documents on my dining table, covered now with a tablecloth. Should I trust Aunt Susan with what I'd learned? "I received something from Dad yesterday," I said carefully. "A letter he wrote before he died." Aunt Susan's eyebrows rose. "Arthur wrote to you? What did he say?" I measured my words. "He had concerns about how Rebecca was handling his affairs near the end." "Oh," a shadow crossed her face. "I see. Did you notice anything, Aunt Susan, during those last months?" She looked away, her fingers nervously adjusting her scarf. "Your father was very ill, Margaret, and Rebecca was there every day making decisions, talking to doctors. You were there too, of course," she added quickly. "But Rebecca has always been forceful about taking charge." "Yes, she has," I agreed, waiting. Aunt Susan sighed. "There were times when decisions were made that seemed rushed. Your father would say one thing when we were alone, but somehow by the time Rebecca arrived, everything had changed." "What kinds of decisions?" "The house, for one thing. Arthur always said he was leaving it to you since you'd given up so much to help with your mother's care." But then suddenly the plan changed. My heart raced. Did he say why? Rebecca explained that he worried about you living there alone, that it would be too much responsibility for you. Aunt Susan looked up, her eyes suddenly sharp. But I never quite believed that. Arthur knew you were perfectly capable. I took a deep breath. Do you think Rebecca pressured him to change his will? Aunt Susan was quiet for a long moment. Margaret, what exactly did your father's letter say? Instead of answering, I walked to the dining table and removed the tablecloth. It pointed me toward these. As Aunt Susan looked through the documents, her face grew increasingly pale. When she finished, she sat back, looking stricken. I had no idea it went this far, she whispered. The money for his treatments. Oh, Margaret. I haven't decided what to do yet, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Aunt Susan reached across the table and grasped my hand. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. It's time someone stood up to Rebecca. After she left, I sat alone in my living room, turning over my options. I could confront Rebecca directly. I could consult a lawyer about contesting the will. I could expose her actions to the entire family. But something held me back. Rebecca had spent decades crafting her image as the successful, caring daughter, while painting me as incompetent and pitiful. A direct confrontation would just play into her hands. She'd twist it into another example of poor Maggie's jealousy. No, I needed to be smarter, more strategic. My phone buzzed again with another text from Rebecca. We need to discuss the house. I've had an offer from developers. Good money if we act fast. I smiled for the first time that day. Rebecca had no idea what was coming. Rebecca's text about selling the house haunted me as I drove to work Monday morning. For the first time in years, I felt something unfamiliar stirring inside me. Resolve. At Oakwood Public Library, where I'd been head librarian for 15 years, everything seemed different. Rebecca always dismissively called it my little job, though I managed 12 staff members and $1 million budget. Morning, Margaret, called Dennis, our security guard. You're looking sharp today. I glanced down at my navy pantsuit, rarely worn but appropriate for someone about to fight. Back, thanks, Dennis. In my office, I reviewed my morning's work. Calls to a real estate attorney, a financial advisor, and, hardest of all, a private investigator. The evidence in Dad's safe deposit box left me no choice. Rebecca was capable of far more than I'd imagined. My computer chimed with yet another email from her. Have you thought about the house? The developers need an answer this week. We could both use the money. I closed it without responding. Let her wait. During lunch, I called the attorney, Elaine Mathers. Based on what you've described, she said, we have excellent grounds to contest the current will. Your father was clearly not of sound mind when the changes were made. Can Rebecca force the house sale without me? Not without your signature. As co-owner, you have equal say. Relief washed over me. And if I wanted to buy her out instead? That's certainly an option, though it would require a fair market valuation. I gazed at the photo on my desk. Mom and Dad on their 40th anniversary. The family home had been their pride and joy. The thought of developers destroying it made my stomach clench. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Lily, our young reference librarian, poked her head in. There's someone asking for you at the front desk. Says he's your cousin? Thomas Wheeler, she added when I asked for a name. My heart sank. Thomas was Rebecca's closest ally, her husband's golfing buddy, and perpetual echo chamber for her opinions. He stood awkwardly by the circulation desk, his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights. At 52, he had the ruddy look of someone whose hardest daily decision was which restaurant to expense on the company account. Margaret, he said with a forced smile. Got a minute? Coffee shop across the street? Once seated, Thomas leaned forward conspiratorially. Rebecca says you're not responding about the house. Of course. She'd sent her emissary rather than risk direct confrontation. I've been busy, I said simply. Look, Margaret, this is a fantastic opportunity. The developers are offering above market value for luxury townhomes. The neighborhood is hot right now. I'm aware of real estate trends, Thomas. He blinked, surprised by my tone. Rebecca's worried you're being sentimental about the old place. There it was, subtle manipulation, painting me as emotional and impractical while Rebecca was just being sensible. It's not about sentiment, I replied. It's about making the right decision for me. What does that mean? I sipped my coffee, enjoying his confusion. It means I'll decide when I'm ready, not on Rebecca's timeline. The developers won't wait forever. Then they don't want it badly enough. I cut in, and I find it interesting that Rebecca knew about this offer but didn't mention it until after Dad's funeral. Thomas shifted uncomfortably. She was waiting for the right time. Grief can cloud judgment. I almost laughed. Rebecca, concerned about my grief? The same Rebecca who'd been showing potential buyers through Dad's house while he was still in hospice? Need to get back to work, I said, gathering my purse. Tell Rebecca I'll be in touch when I've made my decision. As I stood, Thomas grabbed my wrist. What's gotten into you, Margaret? You're acting different. I gently but firmly removed his hand. Not different, Thomas, just not invisible anymore. Back at the library, I found 3 missed calls from Rebecca and another email marked urgent. The sense of power was unfamiliar but not unwelcome. For once, Rebecca was the anxious one. That evening, the private investigator called with preliminary findings. Mrs. Wheeler has been quite busy, he said neutrally. In the past year, she's made several large cash withdrawals from a joint account. With your father. Money that doesn't appear in any visible assets. How large? Nearly $200,000. Most withdrawals occurred while your father was hospitalized. I closed my eyes, absorbing the betrayal. Dad's medical care fund had been even larger than I thought. There's more. 2 weeks ago, she met with developers at a downtown restaurant. They've been planning this sale for months, not days. So she'd been negotiating behind my back even before Dad died. I thought of all the times she'd insisted on being alone with him in his hospital room. Had she been pressuring him even then? Later, I drove to the family home on Maple Street. Standing in the darkening driveway, I gazed at the familiar, red brick colonial where I'd grown up. Inside, everything remained as Dad had left it, his reading glasses on the desk beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. As I turned to leave his study, something caught my eye. A cardboard box labeled Margaret Keepsakes. Inside were childhood. Mementos I thought long gone. Art projects, school awards, my college acceptance letter. Beneath these was Dad's leather-bound journal, started after Mom died. I opened to an entry from 5 years ago. Margaret came by today. She insists on doing my grocery shopping and won't take a penny. When I tried to thank her, she just smiled and said that's what family does. Rebecca called afterward about her promotion celebration. She mentioned their Hawaii trip and hinted again about borrowing against the house for investments. I don't know how my 2 daughters turned out so differently. I tucked the journal into my bag. As I locked up, my phone buzzed with Rebecca's text. Family meeting at my house tomorrow, 7 p.m. Non-negotiable. We need to discuss the house situation. For once, I smiled at her demanding tone. Yes, we certainly did need to discuss the situation, just not the way Rebecca was expecting. Rebecca's house always made me feel inadequate. The sprawling Tudor in Hillcrest Estates announced her success to everyone who drove past. The manicured lawn, the luxury cars in the circular driveway, the imposing double doors with their gleaming brass fixtures. Tonight, however, I approached it differently. The ostentatious display seemed almost desperate, like someone trying too hard to prove their worth. I parked my modest sedan behind Thomas's BMW and checked my appearance in the rearview mirror. I'd taken special care with my outfit, a simple but elegant charcoal dress that brought out the silver strands in my hair rather than trying to hide them. Dad's journal sat in my purse along with copies of the most damning documents from the safe deposit box. The front door opened before I could ring the bell. Rebecca stood there, impeccably dressed as always, her smile tight. Finally, she said, glancing at her watch. Everyone's waiting. I followed her into the formal living room, where Thomas sat with his wife Claire. Aunt Susan was there too, her eyes finding mine with a small, encouraging nod. Wine? Rebecca asked, already pouring herself a generous glass. No, thank you. She raised an eyebrow. Suit yourself. I took a seat on the edge of the sofa, my posture straight, hands folded in my lap. Rebecca remained standing, clearly wanting to command the room. I've called this meeting because we need to make decisions about Dad's house, she announced. The developers have given us a deadline. They need an answer by Friday. What developers? Aunt Susan asked innocently, though I'd already briefed her. Rebecca waved her hand dismissively. Arbor Creek Properties. They're offering well above market value for the lot. It's an incredible opportunity. How long have you been in talks with them? I asked quietly. Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. A few weeks. Why? Just curious about the timeline. She took a sip of wine. The point is, we need to move quickly. The market won't stay this hot forever. And what would happen to the house? Aunt Susan pressed. They'd tear it down, obviously, Rebecca said with a hint of impatience. They're building luxury townhomes. It's progress, Susan. That neighborhood is changing. I watched Rebecca carefully as she outlined her vision. How we'd split the profits, how generous the offer was, how impractical it would be for either of us to keep the house. Her voice had that familiar, condescending tone she always used when explaining things to me, as if I couldn't possibly understand business matters. When she finally paused for breath, I spoke. I'm not interested in selling. The room went silent. Rebecca blinked, her wine glass suspended halfway to her lips. What do you mean you're not interested? I mean exactly that. I don't want to sell Dad's house. Rebecca laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. Don't be ridiculous, Margaret. What would you even do with it? You can't afford the upkeep on your librarian's salary. My finances aren't your concern, I replied evenly. They absolutely are when they affect my interests. Her voice had that dangerous edge now. That house is half mine. I have the right to sell my share. Actually, I said, opening my purse, that's not entirely accurate. I withdrew a folder and placed it on the coffee table. I visited Dad's attorney yesterday. The will that was read after the funeral, the one giving us each 50% of the house, isn't legally valid. Rebecca's face flushed. What are you talking about? The attorney has concerns about Dad's mental capacity when those changes were made, especially given his medical records from that period, which show he was heavily medicated for pain. Thomas Hayor leaned forward. Margaret, this is absurd. Is it? I turned to face him. Because the medical records also show that Dad's treatments were discontinued due to financial constraints, just 3 weeks after $200,000 disappeared from his medical care fund. Rebecca slammed her glass down. How dare you imply? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I pulled out another document. This is a bank statement showing withdrawals from Dad's account. And this, I added, placing a third paper. Beside it is a record of your meeting with Arbor Creek Properties 2 months ago, while Dad was still alive. Her face paled. You had no right? I had every right, I said softly. Dad left me a letter explaining exactly what you'd been doing. He kept records, Rebecca, of everything. The room fell deadly quiet. Aunt Susan watched with grim satisfaction, while Thomas and Claire exchanged uncomfortable glances. Rebecca's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her wine. When she spoke, her voice was cold. So what exactly do you want, Margaret? Money? Is that it? After all these years of playing the martyr, you're finally showing your true colors? I shook my head slowly. I don't want your money, Rebecca. I want the house, all of it. That's preposterous, she spat. You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me. No, Rebecca. I've never been jealous. I've been invisible, but not anymore. I opened Dad's journal to the page I'd marked. Dad wrote this 5 years ago. Would you like me to read it? Rebecca's eyes fixed on the familiar leather binding. For the first time, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. This is blackmail, she whispered. This is justice, I corrected her. Dad wanted me to have the house. You manipulated him when he was vulnerable. You took money meant for his medical care. I closed the journal, looking directly into her eyes. I could take this to court. I could share these records with every family member, every friend, every business associate, but I'm offering you a simpler solution. Rebecca's jaw tightened. Which is? Sign over your claim to the house, and I'll keep all of this private. You're bluffing. Am I? I looked around the room. Aunt Susan has already seen the evidence. So has Dad's attorney. So has a private investigator I hired. Thomas cleared his throat. Rebecca, perhaps we should— Shut up, Thomas, she snapped. She paced the room, fingers white around her wineglass stem. Finally, she turned back to me. You've been planning this, haven't you? Playing the quiet, pathetic sister all these years, and now you think you can just— I'm done, Rebecca. I stood up, gathering my documents. Sign over the house, or I go public. Your choice. Her eyes narrowed to slits. And if I sign, then it's over. You go your way, I go mine. Rebecca laughed bitterly. Just like that? After your little power play? This isn't about power, I said. I said, suddenly weary. It's about honoring Dad's wishes. It's about right and wrong. Very sanctimonious, she sneered. I headed for the door, pausing to look back at her. You have until Friday to decide. The same deadline your developers gave you. Fitting, don't you think? In the car, my hands shook so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I'd done it. Finally stood up to Rebecca after all these years. The expression on her face when I produced those documents would stay with me forever. As I drove home, my phone buzzed repeatedly. Aunt Susan texting, "You were magnificent. Rebecca hasn't stopped ranting since you left." Then Thomas, "We should talk privately. Rebecca isn't thinking clearly." And finally, Rebecca herself, "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've started." I smiled grimly at the last message. "No, Rebecca, this isn't the beginning. This is the end." But even as triumph coursed through me, I felt a strange hollowness. The family I'd once known, dysfunctional as it was, had just shattered beyond repair. Was the house worth it? Was justice worth it? As I pulled into my driveway, another text came through. This one from a number I didn't recognize. "Margaret, this is James Wheeler, Rebecca's husband. We need to talk about what happened tonight. This has gone too far." I stared at the message for a long moment. James, who'd always treated me with the same dismissive condescension as Rebecca, suddenly wanted to talk? Tomorrow would bring new battles. But tonight, for the first time in decades, I fell asleep knowing I had finally stepped out of the shadows and into my own light. I met James at a coffee shop downtown. Neutral territory. He was already there when I arrived, his tailored suit and perfectly coiffed silver hair making him look more like a senator than an investment banker. For 20 years, he'd treated me with the same dismissive condescension as Rebecca, barely, acknowledging my presence at family gatherings. Now he stood, awkwardly extending his hand. "Margaret, thank you for meeting me." I took the seat across from him, declining his offer to order coffee. "What's this about, James?" He rubbed his forehead, suddenly looking tired. "Rebecca's furious. I've never seen her like this." "I imagine she is. She's talking about suing you for defamation, getting a restraining order." "For what? Telling the truth?" James sighed. "You blindsided her, Margaret. All those years letting her think you were, well, what? Pathetic? Weak? Dead weight?" The familiar phrase still stung. I was going to say not a threat. He leaned forward. "Look, I'm not here to defend Rebecca's behavior. What she did with your father's money was inexcusable." I blinked, genuinely surprised. "You knew?" "Not the full extent. Not until last night when she was raging about your accusations." He made air quotes. "She didn't realize she was confessing everything. And you're telling me this why? Because this has to stop." James lowered his voice. "Rebecca and I are separating. Have been for months, quietly. The papers aren't signed yet, but they will be soon." The revelation stunned me. Rebecca and James had always presented themselves as the perfect power couple. "I don't understand. What does your separation have to do with me in the house?" "Rebecca's not just angry about the house, Margaret. She's terrified of exposure. Her real estate business depends on her reputation. If word gets out about what she did to your father..." I studied his face, looking for the manipulation. "So you want me to back off to protect Rebecca's reputation?" "No." He sighed heavily. "I want you to know that Rebecca isn't in the financial position she pretends to be. The business is struggling. She's overextended on properties that aren't selling. That's why she's so desperate for the cash from selling your father's house." Again, how is this my problem? James met my eyes directly. "It's not. But if you push her into a corner, she'll fight dirty. She always does. I just thought you should be prepared." As James walked away, I sat alone, processing this unexpected turn. Rebecca's perfect life was crumbling before the confrontation even happened. It explained her desperation, her rage when I refused to sell. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine, my attorney. Rebecca's lawyer contacted me. She wants to meet tomorrow to discuss settlement terms. I smiled faintly. Progress. When I returned to work, Lily was waiting by my office door, concern etched on her young face. "Everything okay? A woman called for you 3 times this morning. Wouldn't leave a message, but she sounded upset." "Let me guess. My sister?" Lily nodded. "She said it was urgent family business." "I'm handling it, Lily, but thank you." Alone in my office, I glanced at the calendar on my desk. Friday, Rebecca's deadline, was tomorrow. In less than 24 hours, I'd know whether she would concede or escalate. My phone rang. "Rebecca, hello?" I answered calmly. "We need to talk," she said, her voice tight. "Not over the phone. Your lawyer contacted mine. They're meeting tomorrow." "This isn't about lawyers, Margaret. This is about family." I almost laughed. "Since when do you care about family?" Silence stretched between us. Then, unexpectedly, her voice cracked. "You have no idea what I care about." The vulnerability in her tone caught me off guard. Was this another manipulation? "Why did you do it, Rebecca?" I asked quietly. "The money for Dad's treatments." "Why?" She exhaled sharply. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." Another long pause. "Fine. The Brookside development, my biggest project. It was failing. I needed capital. Fast to keep investors from pulling out. Dad's money was supposed to be a short-term loan. I was going to pay it back double when the project sold, but it didn't sell." "No," she admitted. "The market shifted. By the time I realized how bad it was, Dad was." She didn't finish the sentence. "You could have told me the truth." "And what? Admit failure? To you?" Bitterness crept back into her voice. "Perfect? Patient Margaret who never took risks, never failed because she never tried?" The old accusations still had power to wound, but less than before. "I made my choices, Rebecca, just like you made yours. And now you're punishing me for mine." "No, I'm holding you accountable. There's a difference." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "What if I can pay you for the house? Market value. It's not about money." "Then what is it about?" "Justice," I said, simply. "Dad wanted me to have the house. You manipulated him when he was vulnerable. So this is revenge." "No, Rebecca. This is me finally standing up for myself." She laughed, a harsh sound. "After all these years, who would have thought you had it in you?" The call ended without resolution, leaving me unsettled. Despite everything, some part of me still sought Rebecca's approval, still wanted her to see me as an equal. Old habits die hard. That evening, Aunt Susan came by with homemade lasagna and concern in her eyes. Thomas called. He said Rebecca's a wreck. I set the warm dish on my counter. "James told me they're separating." "Oh my." Susan lowered herself onto a kitchen stool. "I had no idea. Apparently Rebecca's business is struggling too. She's not the success story she pretends to be." Susan shook her head sadly. "Your sister has spent her whole life creating an image. I wonder if she even knows who she really is anymore." Later, alone with my thoughts, I pulled out Dad's journal again, flipping through pages of his observations. On so many occasions, he'd noted Rebecca's materialism, her fixation on status. But he'd never confronted her, never tried to correct the behavior. Just as I'd never confronted her until now, the realization hit me with unexpected force. Dad and I were alike, conflict avoidant, preferring peace to confrontation. We'd both let Rebecca dominate because fighting back seemed too costly, but at what price had that peace come? My phone chimed with an email from Elaine. Rebecca's lawyer proposed terms. She'll transfer her half of the house in exchange for 30% of its appraised value and your signed agreement not to disclose any financial matters related to your father. Meeting scheduled tomorrow at 2 p.m. Let me know if this works for you. I stared at the message. After everything, Rebecca was yielding, at least partially. Not out of remorse or recognition of what she'd done, but out of self-preservation. Was it enough? Could I accept this compromise and finally move forward? Outside my window, rain began to fall. Gentle patterns on the glass mirroring the tears that unexpectedly slid down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness or anger, but release. For the first time since Dad died, perhaps since Mom died years before, I felt truly seen. Not as the family disappointment, not as the invisible sister, but as someone whose wishes and feelings mattered. Tomorrow would bring resolution, one way or another, but tonight this small victory was enough. The legal office felt sterile and impersonal. Neutral ground for our final confrontation. Rebecca arrived with her attorney, refusing to meet my eyes as we sat across the polished conference table. She looked different, thinner, her designer outfit slightly loose, dark circles, visible beneath her makeup. The invincible sister I'd grown up in the shadow of suddenly seemed human. Legal terminology and carefully worded clauses filled the next hour. Rebecca would sign over her half of the house. I would pay her 30% of its appraised value and sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding Dad's financial matters. As the attorneys reviewed the final points, Rebecca finally looked up. This is what you wanted all along, isn't it? She said quietly. To cut me out. I shook my head. No, Rebecca. I never wanted any of this. Then what did you want? The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. Respect, I said finally. Recognition. To not be the family disappointment. Something flickered in her eyes, not quite remorse, but recognition. You were never the disappointment, Margaret, she said, her voice barely audible. Not to Dad. The words struck me with unexpected force. After a lifetime of feeling invisible beside her, hearing Rebecca acknowledge Dad's love for me was disorienting. Then why? I asked. Why treat me like I was nothing? Rebecca glanced at the attorneys, who excused themselves to give us privacy. Because you had what I could never have, she said after they left. Dad's unconditional love. No matter what I achieved, top of my class, successful business, perfect marriage, it was never enough. But you. She swallowed hard. You just had to be you. I stared at her, stunned. That's not true. He was always praising you, bragging about your accomplishments. He was proud of what I did, Margaret, not who I was. Her voice cracked slightly. With you, it was different. He loved you, just for being you. All those years I'd believed Rebecca was the favored child. I'd never imagined she felt the same inadequacy I did, just from the opposite direction. I didn't know, I said softly. How could you? I made sure no one knew. We sat in silence, decades of misunderstanding stretching between us. The house meant a lot to you, didn't it? She finally asked. It's all I have left of them, of who we were before. Everything changed. Rebecca nodded slowly. I hated that house. Every corner held some memory of not being enough. Another revelation that shifted my perspective. The home I treasured as a sanctuary, she experienced as a prison of expectations. What will you do with the money from Dad's account? She asked. I met her gaze steadily. I've donated it to the cancer center where he was treated. In his name. Something like respect flickered across her face. Of course you have. We signed the papers. Rebecca's signature sharp and angular, mine flowing and rounded. Different in every way, just as we had always been. As we stood to leave, Rebecca hesitated. I won't apologize for who I am, Margaret. I'm not asking you to. But I am sorry for calling you what I called you at the party. It wasn't a complete apology, but from Rebecca, it was monumental. Outside, rain fell softly on the pavement. Rebecca paused before getting into her car. You know this means we're done, right? No more family dinners, no holidays. This is it. I nodded. The price of standing up for myself was the final severing of an already fragile connection. We were done a long time ago, Rebecca. We just didn't admit it. She gave me one last look. Not warm, but honest. More honest than we'd been with each other in decades. Goodbye, Margaret. Goodbye, Rebecca. 3 months later, I stood in the freshly painted living room of the family home, now truly my home. Dad's reading chair still occupied the corner by the window, but new bookshelves lined the walls, filled with volumes I'd collected over the years. Aunt Susan brought a housewarming plant, and neighbors I hadn't seen in years stopped by with casseroles and curious glances. So you're really living here now? Mrs. Henderson from across the street asked. All by yourself? There was that familiar note, the subtle suggestion that a single woman my age living alone was somehow incomplete. Yes, I said with a smile. Just me. And for the first time, just me felt like more than enough. Rebecca sold her Tudor mansion and moved to Arizona with a settlement from her divorce. According to Aunt Susan, she'd started a smaller real estate business there. More modest, more honest. We hadn't spoken since the day at the attorney's office, and probably never would again. Sometimes at night, sitting in Dad's old chair with one of his books open on my lap, I'd imagine what he might think of how everything turned out. I liked to believe he'd be proud, not of the confrontation or the legal battle, but of the fact that I'd finally found my voice. The library board had approved my proposal for a community reading program for homebound seniors. At 60, I was doing some of the most fulfilling work of my career. On weekends, I worked in Mom's garden, restoring flower beds that had been neglected during Dad's illness. Neighbors no longer saw me as poor Margaret, but simply as Margaret, the librarian with the beautiful garden who hosted the book club every third Thursday. The label, disappointment, had lost its power to wound me. I'd replaced it with words of my own choosing. Independent, resilient, content. Dad's journal sat on my bedside table. The last entry, written just weeks before his death, read simply, "Margaret came today. When everything else changes, she remains steady as the oak in our backyard. My quiet daughter has more strength than anyone knows. He had known who I was all along, and now finally so did I.